Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're going to do something a little different. We are going to completely strip away the flags, the economics, and the campaign slogans, and we're going to look at the structural blueprint hiding right underneath our political beliefs. Have you ever noticed how utterly different political movements can somehow feel exactly the same underneath? Well, today we're exploring a fascinating concept that explains exactly why that happens. I want to kick things off by pointing out a hidden pattern. If you pay close attention, almost every major political movement tells a story where humanity is suffering right now, but we're moving toward a final, perfect destination. And, naturally, they are the ones who are going to get us there. Now, that's not just a metaphor, it is a deeply ingrained psychological structure. Section 1, the phrase immanentize the eschaton. To really understand where this hidden pattern comes from, we need to look at a mid-century political philosopher named Eric Voegelin and a pretty groundbreaking book he wrote back in 1952. So, what in the world does that massive phrase actually mean? Well, for most of Western history, classical theology placed ultimate salvation, what they call the eschaton, outside of time. It was an afterlife brought about by God. The idea was you couldn't just build heaven on earth. But Voegelin argued that modern movements took that exact same psychological structure and relocated it right inside human history. He called this immanentizing the eschaton. Basically, it means collapsing an otherworldly salvation into a this-worldly political project. A really fascinating and honestly kind of hilarious historical detail is how this incredibly complex academic phrase accidentally became a popular conservative bumper sticker in the 1960s. Writer William F. Buckley started using it as a slogan. But you have to imagine, most of the people wearing these buttons had absolutely zero idea they were promoting a highly technical philosophical critique of modern political psychology. And this brilliantly illustrates Voegelin's main point. He was saying that modern ideologies essentially hijacked a religious salvation structure and just disguised it as politics. And to be clear, Voegelin didn't just point the finger at one specific group. He explicitly argued that movements all across the spectrum, from Marxism all the way to modern liberalism, all shared this exact same structural move. So the absolutely crucial takeaway here is this universal three-part architectural blueprint hiding inside these movements. First, you start with a fallen present. Second, you identify a chosen agent of transformation. And third, you promise a perfect final state that's just waiting to be built on the other side of the struggle. Section 2, Socialism Salvation Story. Let's walk into our first ideological house and see how this blueprint was used to build it, starting with Marxist theory. The philosopher Karl Lowith pointed out that Marxist theory of history mirrors the Judeo-Christian salvation narrative, literally beat for beat. Humanity falls into division through class. But here, the chosen agent, the ones acting as the faithful, is the proletariat. Their suffering is what qualifies them to bring about the revolution. And that final, classless society, that's a genuinely secular vision of a world after all struggle ends. It is the exact same blueprint, just using economics instead of the divine. Section 3, liberalism's quieter version. Now, liberalism likes to present itself as the totally neutral, secular option, right? It's just a system about rules, rights, and markets without any grand cosmic story attached. But let's inspect its structural foundation for a second. Think back to Francis Fukuyama's famous argument published in 1989, right as the Soviet Union collapsed. He essentially proposed that liberal democracy wasn't just another competing ideology, but rather the final answer. He argued that the fundamental ideological struggle of humanity had, for all intents and purposes, been permanently resolved. If you map out that argument, it views history as a directional process arriving at a final, correct form of society. It uses the exact same salvation architecture as Marxism. It's just swapping out revolution and classlessness for capitalism and elections to reach its final redemptive state. Section 4, Nationalism's Myth of Rebirth. Now, nationalism runs a slightly different version of the blueprint. Instead of a universal, humanity-wide salvation story, it focuses on a specific narrative bounded by a chosen people. Just think about the language these movements use today. Even in officially secular states, nationalist rhetoric constantly reaches for explicitly religious-sounding language. You hear words like a chosen people, an awakening, or a destiny. They aren't just asking you to support a mundane policy platform. They are generating intense personal devotion by offering you membership in a grand story of collective redemption. And boom, once again, we see our three structural beams locked right in place. The narrative almost always starts with a glorious past that has fallen into decline. Then, the chosen movement emerges to lead the way, promising a restoration of national greatness through collective struggle. The scale might be different, but the architecture, completely identical. Section 5, Religious Politics, where the circle closes. This finally brings us full circle to religious political movements, where we see the structure out in the open without any secular disguise at all. In these movements, the eschaton isn't smuggled in under the guise of economics or national destiny. It's just stated outright. Political power is sought specifically to bring about a divinely sanctioned order. In a really strange way, these movements are perhaps the most honest version of Vogelin's pattern. Why? Because they explicitly refuse to separate politics and transcendent salvation in the first place, which is the very boundary that secular ideologies quietly crossed. Section 6, Why this structure keeps showing up. Okay, let's slow down and synthesize all of this. Why does this exact same blueprint keep appearing across completely opposing ideologies, across totally different centuries, and in entirely different cultures? When we put these opposing houses side by side, it's pretty wild. You can clearly see they are all built on the exact same psychological foundation: a fallen state, a chosen agent, a final destination. Whether you're looking at the left, the right, secular groups, or religious groups, they are literally all pulling from this identical narrative playbook. The honest truth here? Humans find the idea of raw historical contingency, the idea that random events are just going nowhere in particular for no ultimate reason, absolutely terrifying to sit with. So we latch onto political ideologies that tap into the ancient psychological architecture of a destination. It's simply a much more livable way to experience history than believing things just happen mostly by accident. But here is where we find the real-world stakes of this explainer. Vogelin's real warning wasn't about favoring one side over the other. His point was that any ideology becomes incredibly dangerous the moment it stops being a mere proposal and starts treating its vision as history's inevitable sacred destination. Because that is the exact moment where political compromise starts to feel like literal betrayal. Your opponents stop looking like people with different views, and they start looking like literal obstacles to salvation itself. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to really chew on. Think about it. When you look at the political movement that you find most convincing, does it promise you a policy, or does it promise you a final destination where the struggle ends? I would absolutely love to hear your honest answers down in the comments. Thanks so much for joining me, and I'll catch you in our next explainer.